The heavy barrel of the suppressed pistol pressed into the soft skin beneath my jaw, forcing my head back until the velvet curtains of the VIP lounge blurred. My hands, still trembling inside white lace gloves, clutched a silver tray that held nothing but a shattered champagne flute and a thumb drive dripping with blood. 8 weeks, Elara, Leo whispered, his voice a low vibration against my ear that smelled of expensive tobacco and impending death. 8 weeks you served us drinks, laughed at our jokes, and tucked our secrets into your apron. He clicked the safety off. The sound echoed in the soundproof room like a gavel. I could see his brother Julian standing by the mahogany door, his eyes tracing the red smear on my uniform where I had hidden the blade. I wasn't a waitress anymore. I was a witness. This is the wreckage of a lie built on high-stakes revenge and the 3 men who own the city. I came for the ledger that buried my father, thinking I could slip through the shadows of the Vane Empire without leaving a fingerprint. I promised myself I wouldn't feel the warmth of their world, but the deeper I sank, the harder it became to tell where the act ended and the woman began. If you believe Elara deserves to make it out of this room alive, hit the like button so her story reaches someone who can help her disappear. I had arrived at the Gilded Lily 60 days ago, my resume forged and my heartbeat calibrated to stay under 70 beats per minute. I balanced a tray of crystal glasses on my left palm, navigating the sea of silk ties and perfume. Julian Vane, the oldest brother and the ice in the family veins, sat at the corner booth. He didn't look at the menu. He looked at the reflection in his butter knife. The last girl spilled a drop of Macallan on this table, he said, his voice cutting through the jazz music. She hasn't been back for her final paycheck. I placed his drink on the napkin without a sound, my eyes fixed on the floorboards. My goal was the safe in the basement, but Julian's gaze felt like a spotlight on a fugitive. The first complication hit during my second week when the youngest brother, Silas, grabbed my wrist in the walk-in freezer. The air was a biting -10 degrees and my breath misted between us. He didn't want a refill. He pulled a crumpled photograph from his pocket. A picture of my father standing in front of the Vane shipping docks 10 years ago. You have his chin, Silas murmured, his thumb brushing my pulse point. And his habit of looking for things that don't belong to him. He didn't scream for the guards. Instead, he handed me a keycard with the Vane crest embossed in gold. The safe doesn't hold the ledger, Elara. The safe holds the bait. My hand shook as I took the plastic, the cold metal of the freezer handle biting into my spine. I waited until the club's neon sign flickered off at 4 a.m. The hallway smelled of stale gin and industrial cleaner. I bypassed the safe in the basement, moving instead to the private elevator Silas's card unlocked. It took me to the penthouse, a glass cage overlooking the sleeping city. I knelt by the desk, my fingers tracing the hidden seam in the floorboard Silas had hinted at. My skin felt electric. I pulled back the wood, expecting paper, but found a small velvet-lined box containing a singular glass eye. I held it up to the moon and a laser swept across my retina. A hidden compartment in the wall hissed open, revealing a wall of monitors. Every camera in the club was directed at one person, me. 8 weeks of my life were archived in high definition, but in every frame, a different Vane brother was standing just out of my sight, watching. Julian's silhouette appeared in the doorway, the light from the hallway casting a long, jagged shadow across the monitors. He didn't reach for a weapon. He held a glass of water. Silas gave you the key because he wants to see you run, Julian said, stepping into the room. Leo wants to see you bleed. But I want to see you choose. He tossed a second thumb drive onto the desk. It was identical to the one currently tucked into my thigh holster. One of these contains the evidence that clears your father. The other triggers a silent alarm to the police that will put you in a cell for 20 years for industrial espionage. He stepped closer, the smell of rain clinging to his coat. The clock is ticking, Elara. The guards are on the stairs. I grabbed the drive on the left, my fingers acting on a hunch I couldn't name. I dived for the balcony, the wind screaming at 80 floors up. I didn't look down. I hooked my rappelling line to the railing and dropped into the abyss just as the mahogany doors burst open. I hit the pavement 3 blocks away, my knees buckling. I needed to get to the drop-off point, but a black SUV lurched onto the sidewalk, blocking my path. The window rolled down to reveal Leo, the middle brother, his face illuminated by the dashboard's red glow. "The drive you took is the alarm, sweetheart," he smiled, and the sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder with every heartbeat. The blue and red lights danced against the brick walls of the alleyway as I pressed my back into the damp shadows. Leo stepped out of the SUV, his leather gloves creaking as he fisted his hands. "Julian plays games with the mind," Leo said, his boots crunching on broken glass. I prefer the physical. He pulled a serrated blade from his belt. I reached for my apron, tearing the fabric to reveal the compact pistol I'd spent 2 months praying I wouldn't use. My finger hovered over the trigger, the metal warm against my skin. Silas stepped out from behind a dumpster, holding a tablet that showed a live feed of my mother's house. "If Leo dies, the house goes up," Silas said, his voice devoid of its earlier warmth. The weight of the betrayal felt like a physical blow to my chest. I lowered the gun, the barrel dipping toward the oil-slicked ground. "If you believe the Vane brothers are the real monsters in this story, drop a like so the algorithm knows the story matters." Silas approached me, his movements fluid and predatory. He took the pistol from my limp hand and tossed it into the sewer grate. "We didn't kill your father, Elara," he whispered, leaning so close I could feel the heat radiating off his chest. "We saved him. He's been in the basement of the club for 10 years, keeping the books for us." He turned the tablet around. The video changed. It showed my father, aged and gray, sitting in a room filled with gold bars and ledgers, his pen moving tirelessly across the page. He looked up at the camera and for a split second he winked. It was the signal we had practiced when I was 6 years old. The trap is set. "He's not a prisoner," Leo spat, looking at the screen with disgust. "He's the architect. He's the one who suggested we hire you. He wanted to see if his daughter was as sharp as the blade he used to kill our father." The world tilted. The Vane brothers weren't the villains of the ledger. They were the victims of my father's long game. Julian's car pulled into the alley, the headlights blinding us all. He stepped out, holding a phone to his ear. "The police are here, Leo. Silas. Elara. We have 10 seconds to decide if we're a family or if we're casualties." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine for the girl who had served him scotch with a hidden smile. We piled into the SUV, the tires screaming as we peeled away from the curb. I sat in the back between Leo and Silas, the thumb drive digging into my palm. Julian drove with a white-knuckled grip, weaving through the midnight traffic of the bridge. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice finally breaking the silence. "To the only place your father can't reach us," Julian replied. "The docks. The very place my father had supposedly died." As we approached the water, the shipping containers loomed like monoliths in the fog. Julian slammed on the brakes. Standing in the center of the pier, surrounded by a dozen men in tactical gear, was my father. He wasn't the man from the video. He was holding a detonator. My father stepped into the pool of the SUV's headlights, a smile spreading across his face that didn't reach his eyes. "You did well, Elara," he called out, his voice booming over the sound of the crashing waves. "The Vane brothers are all in one place. Just like we planned." He looked at the brothers, his thumb hovering over the red button. "They thought they were using you to get to me, but you were the lure to get them into this car." I looked at Julian, who was staring at the dashboard, his jaw set in a hard line. Silas gripped my hand under the seat, his fingers cold. Leo was the only one who moved, reaching for the door handle. "Don't," I whispered. "The car is rigged." "I knew you'd see the wires, Elara," my father said, walking closer until he was inches from the hood. "That's why you're my daughter." He tapped the glass. "Get out of the car. Bring the drive. Let these boys burn for what their father did to our name." I looked at the 3 men I had lied to for 8 weeks. They were murderers, thieves, and tyrants, but they were the only ones who had told me the truth in a world built on my father's deceptions. I didn't reach for the door. I reached for the gear shift. If this story broke your heart the way it broke mine, leave a like so I know to tell more stories like this. I slammed the vehicle into reverse, the engine roaring in protest. My father's eyes widened, his thumb pressing down on the detonator. I waited for the explosion, for the fire to consume the leather and the silk and the lies. But there was only a dull click. Julian lunged across the seats, grabbing the steering wheel and spinning us toward the edge of the pier. "The drive!" Silas screamed. I realized then the thumb drive wasn't a drive at all. It was the battery for the jammer. My father hadn't sent me for evidence. He'd sent me to be the very thing that would stop his own bomb from working so he could kill them by hand. We plummeted into the black water of the harbor. The cold was a physical weight, crushing the air from my lungs. The SUV sank rapidly, the pressure sealing the doors like iron. I watched the bubbles rise past the window as Julian kicked at the glass. Silas found an emergency glass breaker under the seat, the sharp clink muffled by the water. The window shattered, and the sea rushed in, a salty, freezing tide. I felt hands grabbing my waist, pulling me through the jagged opening. We broke the surface gasping, the fog thick enough to taste. My father was gone from the pier, replaced by the flickering blue lights of the police. We huddled on a secluded stretch of beach 2 miles down the coast, shivering in our soaked clothes. Julian sat on a piece of driftwood, his head in his hands. Leo was pacing, his boots squelching with every step. Silas was the only one who looked at me. "He'll come for us," Silas said, his voice a ragged edge. "He doesn't leave loose ends." I pulled a small, wet piece of paper from my pocket, the one I'd swiped from my father's pocket during the struggle in the kitchen weeks ago. It wasn't a ledger. It was a map of a small island off the coast of Greece. The Vane sanctuary. "He thinks we're dead," I said, my voice steady despite the shivering. The car went down. The jammer was active. The police saw the splash. I looked at the 3 brothers. They were all that was left of an empire, and I was the daughter of the man who had burned it. We go to the island. We wait. Julian looked up, his eyes meeting mine. The ice was gone, replaced by something that looked like a beginning. "And then?" he asked. I stood up, the wet apron finally falling from my waist into the sand. "And then we hunt." 6 months later, the sun beat down on the white sands of the Mediterranean. I sat on the porch of a small villa, a glass of wine in my hand. The smell of sea salt and lemon trees filled the air. Julian was in the garden, his hands stained with soil as he tended to the vines. Leo was at the docks, fixing the engine of a boat that could outrun anything the Vane family had ever owned. Silas was beside me, his laptop open, his fingers moving across the keys with a focus that reminded me of the night in the penthouse. "He found the bank account in Zurich," Silas said, not looking up. "He's moving the funds now." "Is he alone?" I asked. Silas nodded. "He thinks he won. He thinks he's retired." I stood up, my fingers tracing the cold metal of the pistol tucked into the back of my sundress. The act of the waitress was long gone, but the patience I'd learned behind the bar remained. We weren't a family by blood and we weren't a family by law. We were a family made of wreckage and the shared knowledge of a man who thought he was a god. "Tell Leo to start the boat," I said. "It's time for the final paycheck." If you believe the quietest person in the room is usually the most dangerous, hit the like button so Elara's story reaches the world. We reached the private estate in the Swiss Alps by midnight. The snow was a soft, silent blanket over the pines. We didn't use the front door. We didn't use the back door. We used the vents the way I'd practiced in the Vane penthouse. I dropped into the study, my boots silent on the Persian rug. My father was sitting in a high-backed chair, his back to me, watching the fire crackle in the hearth. "I heard the vents hum, Elara," he said, not turning around. "You always were a noisy sleeper." "The wine was too dry," I replied, the barrel of my gun level with the back of his head. He turned slowly, a glass of scotch in his hand. He looked at the 3 brothers standing in the shadows behind me. He didn't look afraid. He looked proud. "You brought them," he whispered. "The 3 kings. And you, the queen of the lies." He stood up, walking toward the window. "You think killing me ends the cycle? I'm just the first chapter." He pulled a small remote from his pocket. I didn't wait for him to press it. I fired. The sound was a sharp, clean crack that echoed against the glass. My father fell, the remote clattering to the floor. Julian stepped forward, picking up the device. It wasn't a detonator. It was a recorder. He pressed play. My father's voice filled the room, but it was younger, softer. "To my daughter Elara. If you are hearing this, it means you chose the truth over the blood. The brothers are the key to the vault. The vault is the only way to pay the debt I owe the world. Don't be like me. Be better." We stood in the silence of the alpine night, the fire dying in the hearth. The Vane brothers looked at me, and for the first time in 8 months, I didn't see the kings of an empire. I saw 3 men who were finally free of their father's ghost. We walked out of the estate together, leaving the ledger and the gold behind. The money didn't matter. The power didn't matter. The only thing that remained was the silence between us, a silence that finally felt like home. The sanctuary in the Alps felt less like a home and more like a waiting room for a storm. We spent 3 weeks in that silence, a period of forced domesticity that felt sharper than any knife. Julian handled the logistics, his fingers constantly dancing across encrypted tablets. Leo patrolled the perimeter, his footsteps crunching in the snow like a steady, rhythmic heartbeat. Silas and I sat in the library, the firelight casting long, flickering shadows against the spines of books that hadn't been touched in decades. We were a family of ghosts, bound together by the blood on our hands and the memory of a man who had manipulated us all into a corner. "He isn't dead," Silas said one night, staring into the flames. He wasn't talking about their father. He was talking about mine. A man like that doesn't let a single bullet in a study be the end of his play. He wanted us here. He wanted us together. I looked at my own hands, still pale and steady. I had pulled the trigger. I had watched him fall. But in the world of the veins and the shadows my father built, seeing isn't believing, it's just another layer of the deception. If you believe that the deepest scars are the ones you can't see, hit the like button so this story finds its way to the light. The 8th month began with a knock on the heavy oak door. It wasn't the police. It wasn't my father. It was a courier holding a single wax-sealed envelope addressed to the waitress. Inside was a napkin from the Gilded Lily, stained with a ring of scotch. On the back, written in a hand I knew better than my own, were 5 words. The ledger was never paper. Julian gathered us in the war room, the blueprints of our father's empire spread out like the anatomy of a monster. If the ledger isn't paper and it isn't a drive, Julian mused, his voice dropping to a dangerous octave, then it's biometric. He looked at me, then at the napkin. The realization hit us like a physical blow. The 8 weeks I spent at the club weren't just for surveillance. Every glass I polished, every tray I carried, every drop of sweat I left on those tables, they were collecting me. "I'm the ledger," I whispered. The air in the room seemed to vanish. My father hadn't sent me to find the evidence. He had turned me into it. The Gilded Lily was a giant laboratory designed to map my DNA, my retinas, and my neural responses into a living, breathing key. The Vane brothers weren't my targets. They were my guardians, the only ones powerful enough to keep the key safe until it was time to unlock the vault. The final confrontation didn't happen in a warehouse or a dock. It happened in the one place we all feared most, the ruins of the original Vane estate, a blackened husk of a mansion where the brothers' mother had disappeared 20 years ago. We arrived at midnight, the moon a jagged silver hook in the sky. My father was waiting in the center of the charred ballroom, standing under a chandelier that held no lights. He looked older, a bandage wrapped around his chest where my bullet had grazed him, but his smile was as sharp as a razor. "You're late for your shift, Elara," he called out. He wasn't alone. From the shadows emerged the silent board. The 12 men who actually owned the city, the ones even the Vanes feared. They wanted the ledger. They wanted me. Julian stepped in front of me, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. Leo and Silas moved to the flanks, creating a human shield of silk and steel. "She isn't a key," Julian said, his voice echoing through the ruins. "She's a Vane." The board moved with the precision of a clockwork nightmare. Gunfire erupted, the flashes of muzzles illuminating the ballroom like a strobe light. It was a desperate, ugly fight. Leo took a shoulder hit, but he didn't stop, moving like a juggernaut through the mercenaries. Silas was a blur of movement, his blades finding the gaps in the board's armor. I didn't run. I moved toward my father. I didn't use a gun this time. I used the silver tray I had carried for 8 weeks, now sharpened into a lethal, circular blade. We met in the center of the chaos. "You can't kill the truth, Elara," he shouted, dodging a strike. "You are the only thing that keeps this city standing." I leaned in close, the smell of the Gilded Lily, tobacco clinging to his breath. "Then let it fall," I whispered. I drove the sharpened edge into the stone floor, triggering the biometric sensors he had hidden beneath the ruins. If I was the key, I was going to break myself in the lock. The explosion wasn't fire, it was data. A massive electromagnetic pulse, triggered by my DNA sync, fried every server, every bank account, and every hidden file in the Vane Empire. The board's wealth vanished in a nanosecond. The power they used to crush the city was turned into static. My father looked at the flickering monitors on his wrist, his face crumbling as he realized his masterpiece was being erased. He looked at me not with rage but with a terrifying hollow awe. "You broke it," he rasped. "You actually broke it." As the ruins began to collapse under the weight of the EMP, Julian grabbed my hand. We ran through the falling stone and the rising smoke, the brothers pulling me toward the light of the morning. We stood on the cliff overlooking the sea, watching the smoke rise from the city below. The Vane Empire was gone. My father was a ghost in the rubble. And for the first time in my life, my pulse didn't feel like a countdown. It just felt like a heart. We didn't go back to the Alps. We went to a small, nameless village in the Mediterranean where the water is too blue to be real. We don't have a ledger and we don't have a throne. Julian runs the local infirmary, Leo handles the boats, and Silas spends his days teaching the village children how to read the stars. And me? I still carry a tray. But now when I serve a drink, I don't listen for secrets. I listen to the laughter of the only family I ever truly chose. The golden sun of the Mediterranean began to dip below the horizon, but the peace was a brittle shell. Even in this nameless village, the shadow of the silent board lingered like a stain. We had erased the data, but we hadn't erased the memories of the men who survived the collapse. One evening, while the smell of roasting lamb drifted through the narrow stone streets, a black envelope was tucked under the door of our villa. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation to a funeral, my father's. Except, the location wasn't the ruins in the city, it was a coordinates-only spot in the middle of the Atlantic. "He's calling us back for the final act," Julian said, his eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. "He's not dead and he's not alone. If you believe that some ghosts can only be buried by the people who created them, hit the like button so the Vanes can finish this once and for all." We chartered a weathered fishing boat, leaving the sapphire waters of the coast for the churning gray of the deep ocean. The coordinates led us to a decommissioned oil rig, a rusted titan rising from the waves like a tombstone. As we docked, the silence was absolute. No guards, no sirens, just the groaning of metal against the tide. We climbed the skeleton of the rig, our boots echoing in the hollow chambers. In the center of the main platform sat a single mahogany desk, identical to the one in the Gilded Lily. My father sat there, a glass of water in his hand, looking at a horizon he could no longer control. "The board is gone, Elara," he said, his voice barely a whisper against the wind. "I killed them all. I used the last of the biometric backup to trap them in the vault when the EMP hit. They are the dust beneath the ruins now." He looked at the three brothers, then at me. "I didn't turn you into a key to save the Empire. I turned you into a key to destroy the men who forced me to build it." The revelation was a cold blade to the heart. My father hadn't been the villain. He had been the ultimate double agent, spending 20 years in the belly of the beast just to ensure it couldn't be reborn. But the cost was our lives, our innocence, and 8 weeks of a lie that felt more real than the truth. He stood up, handing me a small rusted locket. Inside was a photo of my mother, not as a victim but as a woman laughing in the sun. "Your mother didn't disappear, Julian," my father said, looking at the eldest Vane. "She ran to protect you. She's waiting in the village you just left." The world tilted. The silent board was gone, the debt was paid, and the ghosts were finally being given names. We stood on that rusted rig as the sun rose, for people who had been forged in the fire of a fake war, realizing that the only thing left to do was live. We didn't burn the rig. We left it to the sea, a monument to the lies that finally set us free. We returned to the village not as a waitress and 3 kings, but as 4 people who finally knew their own names. My mother was there, standing on the pier, her hair silvered by time but her eyes as bright as the Mediterranean. As I walked toward her, Julian, Leo, and Silas stood back, giving me the moment I had waited a lifetime for. The song of the sea was no longer a countdown. It was a welcome home.